A lost child, a pack of mysterious German shepherds, and an abandoned police station that hides a secret that has been waiting to be discovered for years. When 6-year-old Liam Carter finds himself stranded on a deserted road at dusk, fear grips him until a group of highly trained, AFL shepherds emerge from the darkness. Are they a threat, or has fate sent them for a reason? What happens next will reveal a story of unbreakable loyalty, resilience, and a bond that time can never erase. Follow us until the end. This is a journey you will never forget. The story begins on a dark afternoon as the sun sets behind the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted country road. The air is still, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The wind rustled through the leaves, whispering through the trees like invisible voices. There were no houses, no cars passing by, just silence that stretched endlessly in both directions. 6-year-old Liam Carter ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his small chest heaving with sobs. He had only meant to chase a butterfly, its delicate wings fluttering just out of reach, leading him further and further from the safety of his backyard. Now, he was alone. The realization sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He spun around, hoping to see something familiar, but all he found was the empty stretch of road and the dense tree line swallowing the last light of day. Tears blurred his vision as his foot caught on a loose rock. He stumbled forward, crashing onto the rough pavement. Pain shot through his knees, and he gasped, clutching at the scraped skin. Blood smeared across his palm as he tried to push himself up. His tiny frame trembled, part from the sting of the fall, part from the overwhelming fear gripping his heart. "Mom!" he cried, his voice breaking, desperate. The only response was the hollow echo bouncing back from the trees. He called again, louder this time, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness around him. Then a sound, a soft rustling, barely noticeable over the wind. Liam froze, his breath caught in his throat. The bushes off to his right shuddered. Something or someone was there. Another noise. A low, rhythmic padding. Footsteps? No. He recognized that sound. Paws. Heavy ones. More than one pair. Liam's heart pounded against his ribs as shadows detached themselves from the darkness. Stepping onto the road, his body went rigid as a group of German shepherds emerged from the tree line. They were massive, their muscular bodies moving in eerie synchronization. Their fur gleamed under the fading sunlight, dark coats blending seamlessly into the dusk. Their eyes locked onto him, sharp, intelligent, calculating. Liam sucked in a shaky breath, scrambling back on his hands. Were they strays? Wild dogs? His young mind raced through stories of aggressive packs, of feral animals attacking helpless victims. Were they here to hurt him? The largest of them, a powerful black and tan shepherd, took a slow step forward. His posture was strong, confident but not hostile. The name Maximus was engraved on a metal tag hanging from his thick collar. Liam barely dared to breathe as Maximus approached. The dog lowered his massive head, his nose brushing lightly against Liam's small shoulder. A single sniff, then another. Liam flinched at the contact, squeezing his eyes shut. No sharp teeth followed. No growl. No attack. Instead, a different sound, a soft whimper. Liam's eyes fluttered open just as another shepherd, this one lighter in color with a faint scar near its ear, stepped closer. It sniffed the scrape on his palm, then let out a low, almost sorrowful whine. Its tail gave the slightest wag, hesitant but unmistakable. Confusion flickered in Liam's tear-filled eyes. They weren't baring their teeth. They weren't growling. They weren't forcing him down. They were checking on him. The fear constricting his chest loosened ever so slightly. He let out a small, shaky exhale. His body still tense but no longer frozen in terror. Maximus nudged him again, firmer this time. A silent encouragement. Liam sniffled, wiping at his wet cheeks with the back of his sleeve. "Do you know where my mom is?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The dogs didn't answer, of course. But Maximus lifted his head and turned toward the road, his ears flicking as if listening for something. Then, he looked back at Liam. It was almost as if he was giving him a choice. "Follow us. We'll get you home." As if responding to an unspoken command, the rest of the shepherds shifted. 2 moved ahead, scanning the road. 2 others fell behind, covering the rear. Maximus remained right beside him, close enough to guide him, close enough to protect. Liam hesitated. He didn't know these dogs. They didn't belong to him. But something deep in his gut told him he was safe with them. He wiped at his nose, took one last shaky breath, and slowly pushed himself to his feet. The moment he stood, Maximus let out a sharp, controlled bark, not loud, not aggressive. A signal. A command. The shepherds reacted instantly, adjusting their positions, forming a protective unit around Liam. He didn't know how or why, but these dogs had come for him. And they weren't leaving without him. With one final glance at the darkening sky, Liam took his first step forward. The shepherds moved with him, their presence steady, unwavering. They had a plan. And whatever it was, Liam knew it would change everything. The AFL shepherds moved in perfect formation, their steps synchronized as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Two advanced ahead, their ears twitching at every distant rustle. Two trailed behind, their eyes sharp, scanning the darkening surroundings. Maximus remained by Liam's side, his presence steady and unshakable. Liam walked with hesitant steps, his small hand clutching the fabric of his shirt. The road stretched ahead, disappearing into the shadows, and the creeping darkness sent a shiver up his spine. His heart pounded with each passing second. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you guys know where we're going?" Maximus didn't react immediately. Then, as if understanding the question, he turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Liam for a brief second before flicking his gaze forward again. It was enough. A silent reassurance. They knew exactly what they were doing. Still, unease coiled in Liam's chest. The sky had shifted from deep orange to inky blue, and the temperature had dropped. His fingers felt stiff from the chill. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see headlights approaching. But the road remained eerily empty. The only sounds were the rhythmic patting of paws against the dirt and the whisper of wind through the trees. Then a growl. Low. Warning. Liam's breath hitched. One of the shepherds at the front had stopped dead in its tracks, its ears pinned forward, eyes locked on the tree line. The others stiffened in unison, their bodies going rigid. Something was there. Liam's pulse skyrocketed. His eyes darted toward the forest, straining to see through the gloom. And then he saw it. A pair of glowing yellow eyes. The figure lurked just beyond the trees, barely visible, but Liam could make out its lean, wiry frame. A coyote thin, ragged, its ribs pressing against its patchy coat. It stepped onto the road, head low, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Liam's legs felt cemented in place. The coyote wasn't alone. A second sound footsteps, heavier than the coyote's. They didn't belong to a dog. And they certainly didn't belong to a human. Whatever was out there hadn't revealed itself yet. The coyote hesitated, scanning the group. It was starving, desperate, and Liam knew that could make animals unpredictable. Before he could think, Maximus moved. The leader of the AFL pack stepped forward, his body tense, muscles coiled beneath his thick fur. His deep chest expanded as he let out a single, guttural bark, powerful, commanding, absolute. The effect was immediate. The coyote's head snapped up. It faltered, tail twitching erratically. The other shepherds responded to Maximus's signal like clockwork. They shifted positions, forming a protective line in front of Liam. Their fur bristled, lips curled just enough to show sharp teeth. A unified warning. Liam held his breath. The coyote hesitated for a second too long. Then it bolted. The creature spun on its heels, disappearing into the underbrush with a startled yelp. But the shepherds didn't relax. Their ears remained alert, eyes scanning the shadows where the other presence still lurked. Liam felt his skin prickle. He wanted to move, to keep going, but his feet wouldn't cooperate. The air felt different, charged, expectant. Then, piercing the thick silence, Liam, a voice. Sharp, desperate, familiar. Liam's entire body jolted. His mother. She was close. His gaze snapped toward the sound, his heart leaping into his throat. The overwhelming relief broke through the fear, and suddenly, nothing else mattered. He turned and ran. The shepherds didn't stop him. They didn't even flinch. But they didn't lower their guard either. As Liam sprinted toward his mother's voice, the AFL pack remained where they stood, still facing the darkness. Watching. Waiting. Because whatever had been hiding out there hadn't left yet. And the shepherds weren't going anywhere, until they were sure the threat was truly gone. Liam's legs burned as he ran, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The trees blurred past him, but he didn't slow down. The moment his eyes locked onto the familiar figure rushing toward him, everything else faded. "Mom!" Emily Carter dropped to her knees just in time to catch her son in a crushing embrace. His small arms wrapped tightly around her neck, his body trembling against hers. She clutched him as if afraid he would disappear again, tears spilling down her cheeks. Relief crashing over her in waves. "Oh my God, Liam," she whispered into his hair, pressing frantic kisses to his forehead. "I was so scared. I thought I lost you." Liam pulled back just enough to look up at her, his own face streaked with dirt and dried tears. His lips wobbled as he tried to speak. His small hands clung to her jacket, gripping tight as if to ground himself. "They saved me," he choked out. His gaze darted past her, back toward the road where they stood. Emily followed his eyes. A few feet away, Just beyond the glow of her car's headlights, the Affle shepherds remained still, their powerful forms barely visible in the dim light. They weren't moving toward her. They weren't advancing to demand attention. They were simply watching. She sucked in a shaky breath, her pulse still racing. For the first time, she truly took them in the way they held their positions, the sharp awareness in their eyes, the sheer discipline in their movements. These weren't ordinary strays. Maximus, the largest among them, met her gaze. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Then he moved first. Without a sound, he turned away from them, stepping back into the shadows. The others followed instantly, their formation shifting in perfect synchronization. Within seconds, they were gone. Liam let out a small gasp. Wait, where are they going? He tried to step forward, but Emily held him close. She squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing left to see. No glowing eyes. No shifting silhouettes, not even the sound of paws against the dirt. It was as if they had never been there at all. Emily's arms instinctively tightened around her son. A part of her wanted to chase after them, to understand what had just happened. But another part of her whispered that these dogs hadn't come for recognition. They had done what they needed to do. And now, they had vanished. With a final glance toward the empty road, she exhaled shakily and pulled Liam toward the car. The drive home was quiet at first. Liam, exhausted from the night's events, sat curled in his seat, his head resting against the window. Emily kept one hand steady on the wheel, her other gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. Then, Mom! Look! Emily's heart jumped at the urgency in his voice. She snapped her eyes to the rearview mirror, her stomach dropped. They were there. The Affle shepherds were running in the distance, their dark forms moving with effortless speed, keeping pace with the car, but never getting too close. Their heads remained forward, their bodies in perfect sync. Emily's grip on the wheel tightened. They're following us. But, no. Liam shook his head. No, they're not. Emily glanced again. He was right. They weren't following her home. They were leading her somewhere else. Her breath came faster. Something deep inside told her to trust them. Without fully understanding why, she slowed the car. Her eyes flicked between the shepherds and the road ahead. Then, as if sensing her hesitation, the dogs veered sharply to the right, disappearing down a narrow path leading off the main road. Emily's stomach twisted. She knew that road. It led to a place that hadn't been in use for years. A place no one had reason to visit anymore. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the wheel and followed. The abandoned Affle police station loomed ahead, swallowed by the night. And the dogs had led her straight to it. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the structure ahead. Emily's hands tightened around the steering wheel as the outline of the Affle police station came into view. The building stood in eerie silence, its once proud exterior now draped in neglect. The sign above the entrance, barely legible through years of wear, read, Affle Unit. The paint had long since chipped away, leaving faded letters barely clinging to the rusting metal frame. The sight sent a chill through her. She had driven past this place countless times before, never giving it a second thought. It had been shut down years ago, its purpose forgotten until tonight. The Affle shepherds stood motionless in front of the entrance, their bodies silhouetted against the dim glow of the headlights. They had led her here, but why? Emily threw the car into park and glanced at Liam. He was wide awake now, his small hands pressed against the window, eyes wide with curiosity. Mom, he whispered. I think this was their home. Emily swallowed hard. The thought lodged itself deep in her chest. It made too much sense. The way they moved, the way they were trained, it wasn't random. They weren't just strays. They had belonged here. The realization sent a fresh wave of urgency through her. Taking a steadying breath, she pushed open the door. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she stepped out, Liam quickly scrambling after her. The shepherds didn't react. They simply watched, waiting. Emily hesitated only a moment before gripping the rusted door handle. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. The door groaned loudly as it swung open, revealing total darkness inside. A damp, musty scent rushed out to greet them, a mixture of old paper, rusted metal, and something long abandoned. Liam pressed close to her side. It's scary in there. Emily pulled out her phone, flicking on the flashlight. Stay close to me, okay? Together, they stepped inside. The beam of light swept over the remains of what had once been a fully functional 9 training facility. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents strewn across the floor, long forgotten. Dust-covered manuals lay scattered across desks, their titles barely readable beneath layers of neglect. But it was the kennels that made Emily's breath hitch. Lined up against the far wall, rows of rusted metal cages stood eerily still, doors hanging open or sealed shut with broken locks. Some were empty, their interiors coated in dust and time. Others still had old bedding, shredded and worn. Remnants of a life that once existed here. Liam's flashlight swept over one of the nameplates affixed to a kennel door. He squinted at it, brushing the dust away with small fingers. The name Maximus was engraved in bold capital letters. His breath caught. He turned to look at the massive shepherd standing only a few feet away. Emily felt her chest tighten. She moved closer, her fingers tracing over the engraved letters. The realization hit her like a blow to the stomach. This wasn't just where the Athol shepherds had trained. This was their home. A home that had been taken from them. She turned slowly, scanning the other kennels. Each one bore a nameplate, each name unmistakably belonging to one of the shepherds standing in the room with them now. Her gaze lifted to Maximus. His deep brown eyes weren't just watching her. They were remembering. He stepped forward, pressing one massive paw against the door of the kennel. The motion was deliberate, as if acknowledging what had been lost. Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. They had never left, not really. They had stayed, guarding a place that had abandoned them. Waiting for something or someone to come back. Liam turned to his mother, his voice small but certain. They were waiting, weren't they? Emily could only nod. The air in the room felt heavier now, thick with unspoken stories, with memories etched into every inch of this forgotten place. And then the sound of tires crunching against gravel outside. Emily's head snapped toward the doorway. Someone else was here. Liam grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her sleeve. The shepherds reacted instantly, their bodies going rigid, ears flicking toward the entrance. Maximus let out a low, warning growl. Emily's pulse hammered in her chest. Who had come to this place in the middle of the night? And why now? Emily's breath caught as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the abandoned station. The Athol shepherds remained still but ready, their ears perked, bodies tense. A shadow moved across the doorway, and then a man stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence immediately filled the space. He looked rough around the edges, his face lined with experience, but his sharp blue eyes swept the room with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something raw. His gaze locked onto the shepherds, then onto Maximus. His breath hitched, his lips parting slightly as if his mind refused to believe what his eyes were seeing. Maximus? The word barely escaped his throat, hoarse, almost broken. The massive shepherd stiffened at the sound of his name. For a split second, he stood frozen, his deep brown eyes locked onto the man before him. Then he moved. Maximus launched forward, his powerful form cutting through the space between them in seconds. The man dropped to his knees just as 90 pounds of muscle and fur crashed into him. His arms wrapped around Maximus instinctively, his fingers gripping thick fur as he pressed his forehead against the dog's broad head. "Oh, buddy." His voice cracked, and then a choked, half laugh, half sob. The other shepherds hesitated only a moment before rushing in, their tails wagging furiously, bodies pressing close. They nuzzled against him, their excitement barely contained. The man's rough hands moved from one to the next, touching, gripping, reassuring himself that they were real. It was as if time had rewound, as if the years had never passed. Emily stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Her chest tightened as she realized exactly what she was witnessing. "You were their handler, weren't you?" Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. The man exhaled sharply, still tangled in the embrace of the dogs. He blinked hard, as if trying to clear the overwhelming emotion clouding his vision. "Yeah," he finally managed. "I was." He slowly pushed himself upright, his hands never leaving the dogs. They refused to leave his side. After a beat, he turned toward her. "James Parker," he said, offering a quick nod. "I was an officer with the Athol 9 unit." He looked down at the shepherds, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "I trained every single one of them." Emily didn't need to ask if it was true. She felt it in the way the shepherds clung to him. The way they recognized him. Trusted him. But one question still weighed heavily in her mind. If you were their handler, why are they still here? James's jaw tightened. His hand found Maximus's head, rubbing absently behind his ears, as if grounding himself before he spoke. "When the station shut down, I wasn't given a choice," he said quietly. "The unit was supposed to be relocated. Every dog was meant to be reassigned, rehomed." His fingers tensed against Maximus's fur. "But that's not what happened." Liam, who had been silently watching from Emily's side, took a small step forward. His voice was barely above a whisper. "What did happen?" James's gaze dropped to the boy, his expression heavy with something between guilt and sorrow. "They disappeared," he admitted. "One day, they were here, and the next, they weren't." Emily frowned. "No one knew where they went?" James shook his head. "I searched. I made calls. But there was nothing. No records. No reports. Just, gone." He let out a slow, shaky breath. I thought they hadn't made it. I thought they'd been lost. Liam glanced at Maximus, then at the others. His small fingers brushed against the scarred ear of one of the shepherds. But they weren't lost, he said softly. They were here. The whole time. James's expression crumbled for just a second. He looked around the station, the kennels, the scattered remains of what once was, the dust-covered nameplates still attached to rusted metal. And then, at the dogs. You never left, did you? His voice was quiet, choked with something unspoken. Maximus lifted his head, pressing his forehead against James's chest. The answer was clear. Emily let out a slow, unsteady breath. For years, these dogs had stayed. Not out of necessity. Not because they had nowhere else to go. They had stayed because they had been waiting. For him. James exhaled deeply, running a hand over Maximus's thick fur. His gaze drifted over the shepherds, who stood watching him, their eyes filled with unwavering trust. They had waited for him. All these years. And now, he wasn't going to leave them behind again. They're coming with me, he said firmly. His voice held no hesitation, just quiet resolve. Emily studied him for a moment before nodding. It was the only choice that made sense. These dogs had belonged to James once, and in their minds, they still did. But will they follow you? Liam asked, glancing up at James. James crouched down, placing both hands on Maximus's face. He held the shepherd's gaze, voice low and steady. Max, he murmured. It's time to go home, boy. You ready? For a long second, Maximus didn't move. Then, his tail gave a slow, deliberate wag. The other shepherds reacted instantly, ears perking up, bodies relaxing. One by one, they stepped forward, pressing against James's side, as if recognizing him not as a stranger but as their leader. That was all the answer he needed. James stood, clapping his hands once. All right then. Let's get them loaded up. The walk back to the cars felt surreal. The affable shepherds moved as one, their steps synchronized, their loyalty unshaken. Despite years of being on their own, they had never forgotten how to follow. Emily's SUV wasn't big enough for all of them, but James had his own truck parked nearby. With little more than a nod from their handler, the dogs leapt into the truck bed effortlessly, settling in as if it were second nature. Liam watched, wide-eyed. They remember everything, he whispered in awe. James smiled, the first real smile he had allowed himself in a long time. Yeah, he murmured. Because they never forgot. As he secured the last dog, he turned to Emily. Thank you, he said sincerely. If you hadn't followed them tonight, I might never have found them. Emily shook her head. I think they found you first. James glanced at the truck bed, where Maximus sat at the edge, ears alert, his eyes locked on the road ahead. His posture was calm, but there was something almost purposeful about it. Like he knew exactly where he was going. With that, they climbed into their vehicles. And for the first time in years, the affable shepherds were heading home. The drive to James's property was quiet, filled only with the steady hum of the engines and the rhythmic breaths of the dogs resting in the truck bed. Liam sat in the back seat of Emily's SUV, his eyes still trained on the shepherds ahead of them. Mom, he murmured after a while. Do you think they know? Emily glanced at him through the rearview mirror. Know what, sweetheart? That they're finally going home. Emily followed his gaze. Up ahead, James's truck turned down a gravel driveway, leading to a vast stretch of open land. Even in the darkness, Emily could make out the outline of rolling fields, a large barn, and a set of sturdy outdoor kennels. But these weren't like the rusted ones at the abandoned station. They were well maintained, ready for use. James pulled to a stop near the fence and stepped out. The shepherds didn't wait for instruction. One by one, they jumped down, sniffing the air, taking in their new surroundings. Maximus was the last to move. He hopped down lightly, his paws sinking into the soft grass. But instead of exploring like the others, he turned to James. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Maximus laid down at James's feet. His massive body relaxed, his head resting on his paws, as if he finally felt safe enough to rest. Liam, watching from a few feet away, broke into a grin. He knows, he whispered, turning to Emily. Emily smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. They all do. Liam hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering in his mind. Mom, do you think they always knew where home was? Emily's gaze softened as she watched the shepherds settle into their new surroundings not as strays, not as forgotten relics of the past, but as a family reunited. She reached out, ruffling Liam's hair gently. They always knew, she said softly. They just needed someone to bring them back. And as Maximus let out a contented sigh, the other shepherds trotting freely across the field, it was clear they were finally home. Some stories stay with us long after they end, And this is one of them. A group of forgotten AFL shepherds, left behind yet never truly lost, waiting for the one person who had never stopped being theirs. Through loyalty, instinct, and an unbreakable bond, they found their way back not just to their handler, but to the home they had always belonged to. Maximus and his pack were never just dogs. They were guardians, survivors, and most of all, family. But this story leaves us with a question. Was it fate that brought them back together, or was it the unwavering loyalty of these incredible animals that made it inevitable? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales that remind us of the extraordinary power of love, courage, and loyalty. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.